Jack, for anyone interested in studying the craft of filmmaking, what films would you recommend that they sit down and watch over and over again?
Wow, which films to study craft? Well, there's I mean, that's a tough one, but I do think, we were talking about Wells, it's important to watch the films where you see all the various aspects of film. Again, cinematography, staging of actors, editing, sound, music, where all of these things are sort of firing on all cylinders. I mean, that's the most practical way. Rather, if you look at, if you watch movies all the time, then of course you can focus on certain movies that are like more performance-based. Like if you're interested in performance and how to create naturalistic, almost documentary style performance, then you don't have to look any farther than someone like Mike Leigh and look at Mike Leigh's films, which again, a lot of them are visually beautiful, but they're all about like capturing real moments between people. But if you want to understand all the components of film, then you have to study people who master all of these areas. So there are a handful of people who are like, there's a ton of them, but obviously Alfred Hitchcock comes to mind right away, because this was, again, somebody who had complete command over the medium. This wasn't an actor's director, this wasn't a visual director only like Michael Bay. This was someone who knew how to use everything. So to watch, I tell my students this, watch Alfred Hitchcock from like when he was making films in England, like even you can start with the silent films, but even if you start with something like, like The Lady Vanishes or The 39 Steps, which are just as funny and interesting and visually stunning as anything, he made later or any recent films for that matter. If you watch all of Hitchcock, you'll be a better filmmaker. Like you could sit down and watch a Hitchcock movie a week and you watch everything, and you watch, obviously Vertigo and Rear Window and Notorious and North by Northwest and Psycho and The Birds and Shadow of a Doubt and Spellbound. You watch all those movies, you'll be a better filmmaker. If you watch Scorsese, sort of like soup to nuts. If you watch, like, say, from Mean Streets on, and you take in, all of his movies, the variety of movies, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, and Taxi Driver, and, not just his gangster pictures like Goodfellas and Casino, but you take everything in. You learn from somebody who cares about everything that's going on in the frame, picture and sound, everything. I think those two, I think Scorsese and Hitchcock, if you're coming in like cold, is a great place to start. And then you can start to realize, then you start to see that, there's a huge gamut. there's so many filmmakers, you can start anywhere. You can go start with Bergman, you can start with Ford, but I think those two, I think that's the place to really start to get a grasp of, that's where you become really aware of camera and camera movement and atmosphere and blocking and composition, because they're all couched in very entertaining pieces of cinema, and they're not so much calling attention to themselves, but they're not, and Wells for that matter. It's not subtle filmmaking. It's very dynamic filmmaking, and that's like a way of learning when you first see like the bold strokes, and then once you recognize those things and how effective they are, then you can start to examine subtler filmmakers, and you can start to recognize those same techniques being applied in a much more unobtrusive way, for that matter. I think, it's crazy. It's a difficult question because you want to include everybody, and I would say Kurosawa. Okay, all right, I would say Hitchcock, Scorsese, Kurosawa. Watch all those. Be a better filmmaker.